All good. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Anin, hello, bonjour. Welcome to Ecom 2021. If this is your first session, welcome back. If it's not, this session is called Reviewing the Realities of Recycling. My name is Alex Campanolo. I work for EcoSchools Canada, and I will be your facilitator for today's session. So before we get into the introductions, I have a brief land acknowledgement to share. And this is under the context of, so Ecom was planned to be in Toronto. So this land acknowledgement is directed toward the GTA in Toronto. I'm facilitating from Peterborough, whose Anishinaabemowin name is Nogojiwanong, and it's part of the Williams Treaty, Treaty 20. For Ecom, we acknowledge the traditional territory upon which the conference is being hosted. For many thousands of years, the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa and the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of the Credit, have sought to walk gently on this land. This territory is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. This acknowledgement signals our desire to seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based on honor and deep respect, and is a starting point to remind us all to enact this work in our personal and professional lives. Thank you for your respect. So first, we have our presenter, who's Jason Gale with Cascades if you're French. So Jason is an environmental coordinator with Cascades Recovery Plus, a Canadian leader in material recovery and division of Cascades Inc., paper and packaging manufacturer focused on giving a new lease on life to recovered materials. Jason graduated from the University of Waterloo, Go Warriors, in geography and environmental management, and has been working in the waste and recycling industry since 2014 in both municipal and private settings. Recently, he's been a participating member of the National Zero Waste Council's Plastic Advisory Panel, and as a member of a UN Global Compact Network Canada industry working group focused on plastics focused on a plastics circularity pilot. Day to day, Jason works on improving the quality of recyclable materials to ensure they can be turned back into something new. Thanks so much for being with us, Jason. We also have our Zoom host, our mighty Zoom host, the head of the AV Club, Chris Metropolis. If he turns sideways, he's Chris Skyline. Okay, all right, tough crowd. Participants, if you can put your comments or questions for our presenter in the chat, we can get to those at the end of the presentation. That's all for me. Jason, you have the floor.
Awesome. Alex, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being here on this beautiful Friday afternoon. At least it is here in Toronto. So I know there's lots going on in everyone's lives. So thank you for taking the time to join us here today and my session specifically on recycling. So as Alex mentioned, I'm an employee for Cascades, and we manufacture tissue and paper products in both the packaging and hygiene spaces, as well as industrial protection products. I work in the Recovery Plus division, which is the division that's responsible for collecting and sending fiber and other materials back to Cascades mills and other third-party mills to be made back into something new, as Alex mentioned. So what we'll do today, I want to keep it pretty casual. I know it's Friday afternoon and everyone's ready to kind of wind down for the weekend. So we're just going to chat about recycling, and I'll share my experience with where the industry is now and some tips on how we can improve the industry as a whole. And then we'll talk a little bit about towards the end on engaging students on this topic and how we can all bring it full circle for the next generation. Just make sure my slides are working here. There we go. Okay, so Cascades was founded in 1964, and before that, the Lemaire family, who the gentleman on the screen there that you see is one of the founders, his family believed in green solutions and core values that support the 3 R's right from the beginning. And one of the first recipes for Cascades paper pulp was made in the Lemaire family home kitchen with their blender, some newspaper and some water. And that was the Cascades first recipe for pulp. So our roots really are extended in those green values and using materials as many times as we possibly can. A little bit about our business. We convert material into new products from post-consumer material for the most part. Where I sit at least, we're responsible for bringing those materials back into the Cascades mills, converting them into pulp, and then making something new and shipping it back to our customers where the cycle can begin again. And we can work with our customers to bring those materials that they purchased from Cascades back into the Cascades mills and complete the loop. Because we are one of the leaders in eco-friendly packaging, we have committed to everything that you can see here on this screen. Our design process for products really is fundamentally focused on ensuring the stakeholders in our value chain for the products that we produce are met. When we're manufacturing a new product, we make sure to use as much post-consumer products as possible, not only to participate in the circular economy itself, but to reduce the ecological footprint of everything that we manufacture. What we also do is make sure that the products we produce are recyclable or compostable. It's important in the design phase to understand that your products are going to be going to an end market eventually, and designing it that way from the get-go is the best bet. One of the things Cascades also commits to is using less raw materials in their production phases. We have entire teams dedicated to reducing the amount of water and energy that we use in our products. And because we've had this structure in our business for so long, we've been able to address a lot of the challenges that we're going to talk about today in the recycling industry that we see. So getting into some of the topics today of what the session is all about, the realities of recycling, I wanted to start with how is recycling actually recycled? There's a lot of misconception once the material leaves the curb about what happens to our products. Is everything actually recycled? Where does it go? How does it get from my blue bin back into a new product? So the process of getting the material from your house or from the school, wherever it is really only the beginning of our process of getting a product recycled in today's market. The truck picks up the material, it finishes its route, and it ends up at a facility called a MRF. A MRF is a material recovery facility that operates to sort and separate absolutely everything that gets put into that blue bin. So you can see here, the first picture is a load that's been dropped from a vehicle, and it's getting ready to be pushed into the process, into the conveyor belt. The first step in these MRFs is a manual sort of everything that's been put in the bin. This is a very labor-intensive process that involves removing two things from the blue bin materials. Number one is contamination. So anything that didn't belong in the blue bin. And then number two is materials that are going to be dangerous to the machinery once it goes down the line. Some of these things include hoses or really long plastic pieces that are going to get caught up in some of the machinery once it goes down. The amount of stuff that gets pulled off at this stage is pretty incredible. We find a lot of pretty crazy things in the recycling sometimes, you know, from animals to firearms to lots of things. If you can imagine it, we found it in a blue box before. So the step is very critical in ensuring that the rest of the process goes smoothly. And finally, once the manual process is complete, all the materials follow through with mechanical, digital, and then optical sorting as well. So these are very technologically advanced machinery that uses lasers, cameras to optically analyze material and use small jets of air to shoot out the materials that are accepted and rejected, and really just organizing them into their own categories. So what they would do is take the number 1 plastics, they would all go together, number 2s, 3s, and so on. What they would also do is separate categories within each numbered plastics or paper. So in number 1 plastics, there may be a couple different categories that these machines need to identify and separate the materials out to be sorted. Once we've completed that process, our final step as a recycler is to bale it. A bale is just a compacted cube of material secured by wires. It's really nothing fancy, but it's the way that we ship everything from our facilities to our end markets. So these bales are created with each specific material grade that is going to be sent to an end market. And it's really at this stage where we start to understand that the loop that we're creating when we talk about the circular economy comes together or can be broken. At this stage, to sell the material, we have to have a buyer. And the most important thing to remember from the buyer's perspective is that they're looking at this material as raw product for their manufacturing. So at this stage, we are competing with virgin materials straight from oil or mined from the ground, where quality is very easy to control and products are designed very specifically. Where with recycling, it's a little bit more challenging with the levels of contamination we see and some of the ways that products are manufactured. So there's a lot of competition here. It's not very easy to get these materials into an end market and to convince them to use some old plastics in their new manufacturing processes. So that process is really just one step, and it's really just the first step from our perspective. And when we're looking at the industry as a whole, it's really important to take a step back and to see it as an entire value chain. The value chain itself is something that we need to do to understand who the players are, where material goes, and what we need to do to align all of our goals and objectives to actually make recycling work. What you see here is a really simplified version of the recycling value chain and how it exists currently. Products are manufactured at the top, with a combination of raw materials and post-consumer content. For the most part, it's raw material extraction, but definitely depends on what you're talking about. For our business, it's mostly post-consumer content. Each of these boxes is what we call a node along the value chain. And each of these nodes represents a significant step in the process to complete this chain. In reality, there are many, many, many more nodes than I could ever show you on this graph. There's a lot more steps, it's a lot more complicated, and I'm sure many of you have experienced some of this before as well. Within each node, there's also thousands of stakeholders. In manufacturing, distribution and retail, consumption, there are hundreds of thousands of stakeholders who each act independently with their own goals and their own objectives. What some of the challenges we've seen is that each node has to communicate with the other, and that they have to align their goals and objectives to ensure a smooth path throughout the entire chain. So talking about some of the challenges that are associated with our value chain as it stands right now is the global scale of recycling. Recycling is not a domestic activity. Historically, recycling is sent all across the globe. And for the most part, it is. Most of the recycling does not stay here in North America. For the most part, it goes overseas. And that global supply chain has presented a lot of challenges to us when we're trying to understand what actually happens with our recycling. It's nice to say that we picked the material up, we sorted it, we separated it, and we sent it to a recycler. But if the recycler is 5,000 kilometers away across the ocean, in a different regulated zone with different policies, it's challenging to be able to quantify exactly what happened with the recycling. Number two, we had a major shift with some of the Southeast Asian scrap import policies. So this was a kind of a bigger media event that happened. A couple countries like China and Malaysia, Indonesia, all changed the way that they accept recycling from countries like Canada and the US. Historically, they had accepted almost everything in a very unregulated fashion, and they realized that the pollution and the unregulation was beginning to take a toll on their own ecosystems and their own environment. So they made the decision to stop scrap imports and then slowly reopen the door when they could get some of these regulations under control. What that did, though, is create a crazy unbalance in the supply and demand. North American recyclers really had nowhere to send their recycling. There was no one that was willing to purchase it. North American plastics and some other producers aren't as keen on using post-consumer content as some other companies around the world. And what it resulted in is a complete drop in the price of recycling. So one of the realities is that recycling is a commodity. It is a product that is bought and sold. And when that product loses its value, companies suffered and municipalities suffered. A lot of municipalities had to send their material to landfill to avoid paying massive warehousing fees. And some municipalities or regions in the US had to stop their curbside collection programs altogether. So that was a really big impact on our industry. And then, lastly, but certainly not least, contamination remains high. We have a lot of contamination in our recycling bins. They are full of garbage and food and any number of plastics that don't really belong there, but people want to recycle with a good heart and not realizing that the structure is there for a reason. So what can we do to improve it? Really is the key question moving forward. And I think some of the obvious answers are we need to build that local supply chain. It needs to be simplified. It needs to be local. We can't be sending our materials overseas. Logistically, it's a big challenge for us administratively and understanding where our material goes, but from an ecological standpoint as well, and not sending recycling on boats that consume thousands of liters of fuel just to recycle some plastic. We have to have some improved connections between recyclers and producers. That key piece of selling the recycling to someone who wants to buy it needs to be strengthened in our industry. We need to have the producers of any type of material. I don't mean to be picking on plastics, but any type of material to say to the recyclers, this is what we need to reintroduce post-consumer materials into our manufacturing process. It can get very complicated when trying to put plastics back melt it down, and then put it back into a manufacturing process. So we need to have those connections strengthened, and everything is through education. There's a lot of misconception about what actually goes on in the recycling industry, what actually happens to your recycling, and what post-consumer content really means. So it's important that we dig into the reality of what is happening and share that as much as possible at this point. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the way we collect recycling in our industry. It seems like an obscure topic, but what I want to show you is that the way we collect the materials in our industry can be just as important as what we're collecting. One of the methods that we collect material from the curb or from institutions in our industry is through mechanical collection using carts. This is a very common procedure in bigger municipalities and bigger regions where operational costs are a concern. This is done by a mechanical arm that comes out, grabs your bin, and dumps it over the side of the truck. And they can move pretty fast. If anybody's seen this happen and lives in the city, they can move. So it's great from an efficiency standpoint. But what it did is cause higher contamination. And the Continuous Improvement Fund in Ontario did a study in 2014 that showed an almost double increase in contamination by moving to carts. There's a couple really obvious ones. I mean, the operator doesn't have the opportunity to look inside the bin. If you have a cart, if you live in the city, one of the best jokes is you can hide anything in these bins and they'll pick it up. It's really challenging for the operator to be able to evaluate the material before it goes into the truck. And some trucks do have cameras that are able to check the material before it gets dropped. But at that point, the material is already falling into the truck. So the truck is already contaminated by the time that they're able to evaluate the quality of the recycling. It does come with its benefits, of course. As I mentioned, there certainly does need to be consideration for how much fuel we're spending, how much fuel we're using, and how much labor is going involved as these are taxpayer funded operations. But it does cause higher contamination. The other main system is just manual bins. This is the way it's been in the industry for a very long time. It still occurs all over the place. It's still very common in smaller areas. These are, one or two person operations on a truck coming by your house, and one person's driving and one person's at the back. These bins are, as we just saw, filled with lower rates of contamination. They have better quality material. The operators have the ability to view the bin before they put it into the truck and make a decision to either accept it or reject it. That simple distinction has caused a lot of contamination issues like we just saw. Within both of those categories, we collect recycling either in single stream or dual stream. Single stream systems are more convenient. They are associated with increased participation from residents, higher volumes of recycling. Physically, more recycling gets collected because there are less barriers to use. You only have to have one bin, and you don't really have to think about what goes in it because it accepts everything. So that mentality of a lot less barriers and everything goes in it also results in higher contamination and lower quality material. The dual stream systems are less convenient. That's the simple truth. It's not much, but it's that little bit. It's associated with decreased participation from a volume standpoint because there is that extra bit of barrier to participating in a recycling program that has two containers, and you have to put the thought in to understand which materials go in each bin. What that little bit of thought does, though, is cut the contamination by more than half. Some studies have shown, and the one I have on the screen is from Niagara region in 2013. So what can we do better? I mean, it seems pretty obscure that just the way we collect recycling has a profound impact on the quality of it, but it does. And we're starting to understand now that convenience does not make recycling better. The initial thought is that we make it as easy as possible and we manage the contamination later on down the stream. But what we're seeing is quite the opposite, is that it's asking residents and participants of your recycling program to do a little bit of extra work at the beginning, creates a significantly better recycling product at the end. We can certainly understand that collection efficiency is critical. As I mentioned, sending dozens of big heavy trucks out to collect thousands of homes every day has a big impact on the footprint of that recycling program from an operational perspective. But quality is now crucial. The industry has shifted to demand the highest quality recyclables, and collection efficiency cannot be the be all end all. It cannot always be about cutting costs and creating the most efficient collection system possible. The ultimate goal of a recycling program is to create recycling that can be sent to an end market. And without high quality material that we can sort and separate, that goal can't be achieved. So how can we engage students? That's really why we're here. This is an environmental education conference, and I probably have an audience of all educators, and my fiance is an educator as well. And, we have learned from our mistakes in the industry, and we're at a critical point now where we have the opportunity to look back on what has happened in the recycling industry and take a step and teach the younger generation that some of these core fundamental values that will make it work in the future. I think the most important thing is, again, to bring the reality to the forefront. There is a lot of misconception. The out of sight, out of mind mentality is very strong in our industry. There's a lot of assumption that if I put it in the bin and I put it at the curb, it's going to get recycled. And that really isn't the case. There's a lot of hard realities in the process to recycle that aren't being talked about enough. And it's important to bring that forward and just have an honest conversation about what recycling really is. There's a lot of great pictures and videos out there and documentaries on different platforms. I know there's a really, really wonderful one on Netflix that just came out. That would be a great resource as well. And really just going back to the 3 R's. As simple as it sounds, the 3R hierarchy still stands today, with reduction being first, and focusing on reducing the amount of materials that we're using and consuming, and then finding ways to reuse them as much as possible, and then recycling them where we can. And to plug Eco Schools, because we have to do that, of course. They have a ton of amazing resources. Honestly, this is not a commercial. They have really, really good resources for organizing waste audits. As a waste auditor in my past, they have great tools to use in your classroom, of course, when we can get back to the classroom. But even doing these activities at home, I mean, we're all looking for things to do right now, I think, at home with the lockdown, depending on where you live. But they have awesome resources. I know Goose paper bins are great for the home as well. And we just had Goose Paper Day, Goose Bin Day a couple weeks ago as well. So when we do get back to the classroom, install bins and signage, making sure that the recycling bins are actually there. As silly as that sounds, it's one of the key things that we do in our assessments of recycling programs. is to make sure that recycling bins exist in the space and that signage is there and is clear to help people out. A key topic that is critical to recycling and all of this stuff is resource management. It is the foundation of sustainability, and recycling is just one small little piece of that puzzle. Resource management is super broad. It can be taught at any grade level, and the concepts of being able to manage our non-renewable resources, while engaging our renewable ones, is something that can be introduced at any grade level. For the older grades, the concept of the circular economy is an amazing concept to introduce. It really is something that has, caught everyone's attention in the last 5 to 10 years, and that concept will be here to stay. And it really helps bring home the fact that a circular economy works when we can all communicate with each other and make sure that our goals are aligned and we're working towards the same goal. One of the final topics that I think is, again, very critical for our youth and for anybody looking to educate around this topic is to be relying on science. Greenwashing is one of the most common marketing tactics that we've seen over the last 15, 20 years, especially with organic products in our grocery stores. There certainly is a lot of effort to mislead consumers on what is and what isn't best for the environment and for Earth. So I would encourage everyone to focus on empowering students to question the things that they see around these topics and be able to recognize that they need to do some critical analysis and focus on real data. There's lots of really, really good real data on carbon emissions, your carbon footprint, all these types of things that can be used to make critical decisions on if something is better for the environment or not. The life cycle assessment tool really is the pinnacle of doing that. It's a complete methodology of how to analyze a product or a service from the beginning of its life all the way through to its end, and to be able to quantify the emissions that product is going to emit in its entire life. Is something that's awesome, and it's something that we use at Cascades to manage the ecological footprint of our products as well. So for my last slide, I really just wanted to share with you all my 3 best practices for recycling. These are key for wherever you live, whatever your recycling program looks like. These 3 things are going to apply to absolutely everyone. Number 1 is know before you throw. It is the most important thing I can stress for any recycling program that's out there. There are rules, they are there for a reason, and it's important to know what goes in the bin before you put it in the bin. Number 2 is clean, empty, and dry. It's a phrase that I picked up from one of my past employers that has stuck with me, and it applies to every recycling program as well. Your recycling should be clean. Your food containers should be empty, and for the most part, they should be dry. Food waste is the #1 killer of recycling. If there is food waste in your recycling, I can guarantee you that it is being sent to the landfill. It is hard enough to send clean recycling to an end market, let alone recycling that's contaminated with food. And then lastly, don't wish cycle. Wish cycling is a great term that I have picked up on that is recycling wrong for all the best reasons. And, we see a lot of products that are plastic that have the recycling symbol on it that we want to get recycled and we think that it will. But items that are garbage belong in the garbage for a very good reason. And although we want to be able to recycle absolutely everything that gets produced, that unfortunately is just not the reality of the way recycling works. So it's important to keep what goes in the bin, and then what's not out. So that about does it for me from the formal part. Thank you all for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions that you all might have about what I've talked about or anything to do with recycling. I'll give it my best shot.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much, Jason. That was a really, really interesting and informative presentation. I feel like me and the delegates got a really unique, kind of almost behind the scenes look at an industry not a lot of us get to see up close. So yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
We have a whole whack of questions here. Starting off with, so we have 25 minutes left. We're starting off with something I am curious to see you answer. How do you recycle a toddler car seat?
Great question. The answer is you probably can't. I'll be honest. We'll stick with a very honest perspective here in this session. You know, it's a great question because it applies to a lot of other products that we see in you know, in society. A car seat probably has 15 different types of materials in it, and the reality from our perspective is that those 15 different materials are recycled in different ways. So to have that product recycled would mean dismantling every single piece, separating it, and then having 100,000 other car seats that we could pull those materials from to make a bale to be able to send it to an end market. So there are a lot of really challenging products out there that combine different materials that just can't be recycled.
Awesome, thanks so much. We have another question here. Have you seen any changes or growth in demand for recycled materials since you've been involved with the industry?
I'm pretty young, as I'm sure a lot of you can tell. So historical perspective, I may not be able to speak about too much, but I have been able to, since getting, you know, really involved on the plastics side as well. There's a lot of demand from the plastics producers to mandate post-consumer content. They want to use post-consumer material, and they're leveraging their positions to use that. It's a slow process. It's very slow. There's a lot of infrastructure that's involved in getting a product recycled and building the facilities to do that. But I can say yes, in my short time I have. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I don't have time for clever banter. I think I just need to move through these. So how will Canada's single-use plastic ban impact these recycling systems? Can you quantify an estimated decrease in contamination or unrecyclable plastics?
Yeah, tough one, certainly tough one. The decision to ban, you know, again, I want to go back to relying on science. You know, I don't know the details of exactly how they ended up with that conclusion. You know, I want to answer it delicately, but you know what, I think it's a solution that is not addressing the problem. It's removing the problem. So, you know, from a contamination standpoint, you know, we're talking about things that weigh almost nothing. The plastic cutlery and straws and stuff from an industry perspective, maybe it will reduce contamination by 1 or 2%. You know, don't ever hold me to that number. I don't know, but it certainly is an approach that will remove the problem without solving it.
Interesting perspective. We have one from our own Chris Metropolis here. Why doesn't Ontario use multi-stream recycling? In BC, it made much more sense to keep materials separate.
Yes, I know, and from our point of view, it really is, again, the trouble with historical stuff with a young guy, but my experience in the industry is that from a municipal perspective, the focus was volume. Let's get as much recycling as we can. Let's make it as easy as possible for our residents to recycle, which is a very honest perspective to come by. And then we're now starting to understand some of the consequences of that perspective of wanting as much recycling as possible. Another really important aspect there is that recycling prices have dropped so much that the commodities in recycling that used to be able to, they would make so much money that they would be able to pay for all the other commodities that, let's say, didn't make as much money. Now we're in a position where recycling just doesn't make a whole lot of money altogether. There really isn't that group of really, really high earning commodities that can cover the cost of everything else. So we were okay to get away with higher volume and higher contamination, where now we're not able to do that as much.
Very interesting. The idea of recycling as a commodity is kind of a new perspective that I hadn't thought really too critically about until your talk. We have another question here. Are new biodegradable technologies being considered to actually reduce the level of recyclable items so they could easily return to land through decomposition?
Yeah, again, tough one. Good question, though. Those are very, very complex areas of bioplastics, a lot of chemistry, involved in that. There's a lot of other engagement from the organics processing facilities that need to be considered when thinking about that. There definitely is a lot of conversation on the, how fast things can decompose versus keeping a product that's recyclable that can be made into something else. The composting circular economy is existent as well. There's a circular economy for them as well. The fertilizer goes back to fields and creates food that we eat, and the nutrients continue on in that cycle. But bioplastics are very challenging because they create a lot of confusion with recycling as well. If they end up in the recycling, it damages the recycling products when an end market receives plastics that are biodegrading, in front of them. So it's a really tough space to say anything with certainty right now.
Very interesting. So we have a question here that kind of ties into recycling myths. So someone said, I heard that if a blue bin is out in the rain, will the entire contents be thrown out?
That is a really good question because I have got that a lot. The answer is no. No, it won't. Everything eventually will dry once it gets in the truck, once it gets on the MRF floor, once it goes through the machinery, it definitely does dry. Does it make recycling fiber products more difficult? Yes. That's the problem here with things that are wet. So when some municipalities recommend that you put your containers bin over your papers bin in the rain or wind or whatever, that definitely is just an effort to keep them as dry as possible. One of the machines that we use to separate papers from all the containers are spinning drums that have spikes on them, and the paper floats on top. So when paper's wet, it doesn't float very well. It will stick to the machine and it will fall down with all the other stuff. So it's more challenging, but to outright say that all the material is going to be garbage, no, that's not the case.
Very interesting. For someone who keeps talking about how you're a young person, and to cut you some slack, you really seem to know your stuff. So no
Thank you.
discrediting
Thank
from here on out. So we have another question here. Could you share some of the places where we can find information about what should be in the recyclable bin?
Your local municipality. That would be it. If you're talking about at home, there are some really cool applications that municipalities are starting to use right now that are very easy to use. They attach to your phone. They help with collection as well, so you don't miss a collection. Definitely, if you're talking about commercial or at the school, you reach out to your service provider. If it's GFL, Waste Management, whoever it is, they will be able to provide you with a list of acceptable materials that you can follow.
Awesome. There are a bunch of comments here about recycling the car seat, and for the person who answered or asked the first question at the very beginning, there
Yeah.
are some resources in here for you.
Oh, awesome. Good.
Yep. So we have another question here. Is it more likely for glass or plastic bottles to be recycled?
That's a really good question. Glass is tough. Glass is heavy. Glass breaks. It gets mixed in when we're talking about these material recovery facilities. Glass is often challenging to turn back into glass. So if we look at these two materials, plastic, 99% of the time will go back into plastic. Glass tends to fall into a category that, and I mentioned Niagara region, actually, they have an incredible glass process through their material recovery facility. Their glass gets turned back into kind of sand, and then they sell it as sandblasting product. So that's kind of the end of the loop for them. They don't really maintain the circular loop as much as plastic does. We also just don't see a lot of glass get made much anymore, other than jars. Glass is kind of going away a bit.
Very interesting. We have I guess a question specific to a region. So we have York region does black plastic but not styrofoam. Toronto, on the other hand, will take styrofoam but not black plastic. Why is this the case?
Great question. Thank you for asking. One of the most iconic scenarios in recycling is black plastic is number one and styrofoam is number two. I'm going to make us look really bad for black plastic, and I'm going to do it because it's a little funny. When I showed the pictures of, and maybe I can just quickly go back in my presentation here, but when I showed the picture of the MRF, so this one here. So one of the things that you can see in the photo on the right is the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt is black. The way plastics are sorted in the MRF are in those smaller orange smaller orange boxes that are covering over the conveyor. Those are optical sorters that are analyzing the material on the belt and making a decision whether to send it this way or that way. With black plastic, the optical sensors can't distinguish between the plastic and the belt. So it's a simple design issue that really struggles with the machine. That doesn't mean that it can't get recycled. I know our facility, and we have one of these facilities in our business in Ottawa, and we do recycle black plastics. It just has to be removed manually. So it's a bit of a workaround, and it's a little bit of a silly reason that just because they're the same color, it can't be picked up. Styrofoam is two reasons. One, it's very light, very, very light. So from an efficiency perspective, it's very challenging to collect a lot of styrofoam and have enough of it to sell at a cost that is effective to run. The second thing is the chemical properties of styrofoam. If you, and I'm not recommending you do this, but if you take a lighter to styrofoam, it disappears. It doesn't melt down into something else. Styrofoam has some chemical properties that make it very, very difficult to recycle in the traditional sense. I did used to work in York Region, and I know some of the styrofoam programs there. They send those materials to kind of a cold press where you think of plastics, they physically melt it to a liquid and then create little pellets, where styrofoam, you just compress it into something new, and you don't actually melt it and reform it. You just squish it into something new. So long answer, but good question.
Yeah, long answer, but a good answer. That's I just keep the more I hang on to this call, the more I learn.
There's a lot to this stuff.
There's a lot of things people throw away. Speaking of which, we have a question here. My 4-year-old currently pumps out art at an impressive rate, but like many artists, they try to keep as much as possible, but they have to throw some away. Can paper with paint, crayon, or marker be recycled?
Yes. I would put the caveat on a lot of some of the art projects. As soon as you're introducing, tons of glitter and tape, and you're taping wooden sticks to it or plastic things, as soon as you start to mix materials again, so back to the car seat idea where we're mixing lots of different things that can't be recycled, yes, a little bit of paint, a little bit of, marker is totally fine.
Good to hear. So, okay, a broader question here. Where do you see the future of textile recycling? Is this an area that might grow soon and be more available?
Yeah, excellent question. Again, thank you. Textiles are a very unique subset of recycling, and there's a lot of information about fast fashion and how much water and energy it takes to manufacture these clothes at such a fast rate that we're consuming clothes, kind of cheap clothes. Clothing recycling, textile recycling is very challenging for 2 reasons. One, the technology to separate fabrics and get them to a place where they can be remade into something new is not as advanced as everything else. You can see on this screen, we can sort and separate anything you want. The industry is pretty good at collecting, recycling, sorting it, separating it, and baling it. Textiles aren't handled that way. You physically have to, separate all the little fibers, and clothing is a multi-material product. When you take a look at your tag and it's 50% polyester, 50% cotton, we're right back to the multi-material thing where we have 2 commodities there that are managed separately. And there's lots of great alternative uses for textiles. I've done some great work with a few companies that do it, and they sell them to fill car seats, to fill cushions, a lot of the moving blankets. It's a very tough industry that hasn't been focused on a lot. We have focused on the blue bin for decades, and we haven't focused on textile recycling at all compared to. So
very interesting. The trials and tribulations of mixed media recycling.
Yeah, it's tough.
So we have a school within the realm of schools and perhaps eco schools related question here. If students empty but don't wash plastic or metal containers they put in the recycling bins at school, can these containers still be recycled if they are not completely clean?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you know what? I've done some work in schools, and we've had this a lot. You're not going to ask your kids to go to the sink, or a lot of classrooms don't have sinks. to be able to do that. And as long as they are empty, you're good.
Awesome. Another question here. Is aluminum the better choice than plastic if we are choosing products at the source? For example, at the grocery store, is aluminum the highly recyclable and recycled product that I assume it is in Ontario or Canada wide? So I think just a comparison between the two.
Yes, it is. Yes, 100%. One of the main things about aluminum is it can be used a number of times. I'm not going to say a number because I don't know it, but it's a large amount of times it can participate that loop a lot. The other reason is the difference in extraction. So if you have the ecological footprint of extracting aluminum from the ground versus the ecological footprint of manufacturing an aluminum product with post-consumer, it's like night and day. So aluminum has always been, and all metals really fall into that category of being one of the best things for recycling because it's so easy to do. Awesome.
Thanks so much for all of your expertise throughout this, Jason. So that's all the questions that we have. I can't believe we got through it. We have a few minutes left if anyone wants to put in any last minute ones. I guess I have a really quick one that I've just noticed in Peterborough is with respect to recycling. The new company that's come in have been given more power, or maybe they've been kind of using this right a little bit more aggressively in, when they see their a blue bin that's contaminated, they throw a sticker on it and they leave it. And then it's up to the homeowner or whatever to dispose of that. But I'm curious how effective that strategy is, because what I'll see sometimes walking down the street is like those bins just sit out there forever. People just, you don't want to take it, I'll just leave it. It's a standoff, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, the power that these the waste pickup people have, and how if that's effective or,
Yeah, I mean, certainly there can be a bit of a disconnect between the collectors and the people who are managing the material. They have a job to do, and that's to pick up recycling and garbage and organics all day long. And their job is so hard. I've been on a truck for a day and watched these guys do it. It is unbelievable. So, part of me thinks that, they will just pick up whatever they want and they'll move on. It certainly is a bit of a battle between the municipality and the service provider to kind of live up to their end. The municipality wants, every single bin that has contamination to be stickered. But that's tough for those guys, right? It's tough. Working in that setting as well, municipal customer service, it's a great opportunity. I think it's incredibly valuable act to have done by your service provider, to have them sticker your bin and to say, you know what, you did this wrong and here's how to fix it, and here's the website to go to fix it. I think it's it's your frontline customer service. It's a very powerful tool. Does it get done all the time? No, depending on who's on the truck that day, but I do think it's a really powerful tool.
Awesome. Thanks so much for addressing that. It's a bit of an eyesore when it sits out there.
I know.
So we have one tiny question, and then that'll be it. Someone's curious, what types of plastics are recyclable? I am constantly being told that certain plastics are non-recyclable.
Yeah, another excellent question, and one that I can't answer unless I know where you live. It's so dependent on where you live and who picks up your recycling. It is all about the facility that you're looking at on the screen here. If the facility is equipped and the staff are able to secure an end market for that type of plastic, then you can probably recycle it because they have somewhere to send it and they have the ability to separate it from all the other recycling in your bin. That is one of the bigger challenges in the industry, is we don't have a harmonized system. You live in York, you live in Toronto, you live in Peel, you live in Toronto and work in Toronto, and your recycling programs are different. It really depends on your service provider and their ability to recycle it. Some plastics technically or chemically just can't be recycled. Number 7 is one of them, the other category. That is a challenging one that I would say right across the board is not accepted in any blue bins. They're usually just a mix of different plastic types, and no one's going to be able to tell what they used, so no one's going to be able to recycle it. I think number 3 is tough, the PVCs, only because chemically I think they have some stuff that needs to be recycled. I think the chloride part of that is a challenge chemically, but number 6, styrofoam, talked about that a little bit. It's a little bit more challenging. So I would say number 3, number 6, and number 7 are the ones that probably right across the board you're not going to be able to put in your blue bin.
Awesome. Thanks for such a thorough answer. Jason, I don't know if you can see, but the chat is overflowing with thank yous. So I'll echo the group. Thank you so much for such an informative session. Thank you for handling 25 minutes of questions with absolute grace.
Great.
Yeah, so thank you so much to Jason and Cascades. Thanks so much to Chris for maintaining all of the tech. That's it for this session. Everyone enjoy your evening, and maybe we'll see you later at Ecom 2021. Thanks so much.
Everybody.
Or even tonight.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, New Year.
Anyway, Jason, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, no worries, guys. Thank you for setting it all up and keeping it going.
Yeah.
I could answer questions for hours.
I guess it's something everyone deals with on the day-to-day, so everyone wonders, right?
Yeah, well, and that's what's